Hello, I'm Jennifer from the St. Louis County Library. Welcome to Resume Rescue. This series of videos will teach you how to create or improve your resume to aid in your job search. This video will focus on formatting your resume. To see the full playlist of all of the Resume Rescue videos, click on the link in the description. So now let's say you're finished with the content of your resume. You've pulled the keywords from the job description and fit them in context in your resume, so you have all of the content that you need to be successful. Now what can go wrong? Take a look at these two resumes. Both of these are beautiful resumes and are very professional looking. However, the ATS can't read either of them. The ATS can't read graphics or special characters. It also can't read anything in tables or text boxes, which are all over these two resumes. So neither of these would be able to be read by the computer. If you want to, you can make two different versions of your resume. The first version, the one that you have to have, is an ATS style resume. This is the resume you're going to submit with your online application. You could also make a presentation resume or a pretty resume, similar to those ones we saw in the previous slide. This resume you can email to potential employers or print and take to job fairs or interviews. Most of the time, you don't need a presentation resume. But I would say if you want to be something like a graphic designer, you might want to invest some of your time into making a presentation resume when you get called in for an interview. For the rest of this video, we're going to focus on how to make an ATS style resume. That is a resume that can successfully be read by a computer. Take a look at this sample resume. We're not going to be talking about the content of this resume, but rather the formatting choices that were made. Let's start with the name at the top. The font choice here is a little artistic and is going to be very difficult for the computer to read. So you want to make sure you choose an easy to read font. Examples of this include Arial, Verdana, and Calibri. You also want to make sure that you're using the same font on your entire resume. Next, let's talk about the phone number. Make sure you're using a standard format for phone numbers, so either with parentheses and dashes or just all dashes. When you use periods, like in this example, the computer doesn't recognize that that's a phone number. And let's talk about this little symbol between the phone number and the email address. Don't use graphics or symbols. The computer can't read them. This is a special symbol that has been inserted into the document. That being said, anything that can be typed on the keyboard is okay. So if you wanted to replace that with something that can be typed on the keyboard, the computer will absolutely be able to read that. Here are some examples. Next, let's talk about the email address. This email address is written in blue text. All of the text on your resume should be black. You also don't want to use underlines on your resume. If you look closely, you'll notice that the Y dips down into the underline. So the computer is going to read that as a V rather than a Y. So it's safer just to avoid underlines on your resume. Let's talk about these two lines going across the top of the page. Don't use graphics or heavy lines. The computer can't read them, so just delete those. Resume templates especially love these lines that go across. Moving right along, let's take a look at your section headings. So once again, we don't want to use underlines. But something you could do instead is to make it bold or write it in all caps. Another issue here is that there's no space in between the summary of qualifications section and the professional experience section. So make sure there is a space between each of your sections. So looking at this bulleted list under summary of qualifications, there are a few issues here. First of all, you only want to use standard bullet points. These are custom bullet points and the computer can't read them. That falls into the graphics category. But again, anything that can be typed on the keyboard is also okay. So if you want to use a dash or an asterisk or something like that, that's completely fine. Here are a few examples. If you look across the entire bulleted list, you will know that it is written in 2 columns. Don't use 2 columns. Most word processing softwares have a way that you can add multiple columns into a document. Don't do that. The computer can't read it. But you also don't want to use tables or text boxes to create multiple columns. The computer can't read anything in a table or a text box. This is another reason why resume templates usually don't work, because most of them have tables and text boxes all over the place. If you do want to include multiple columns, use the Tab key on your keyboard. Remember, anything on your keyboard can be read by the computer. Also, if you look at this section specifically, the bullet points aren't lined up. So make sure all of your bullet points line up, and that's not just in a particular section. That's for the entire document. Make sure all of your bullet points line up. Now let's look at this first professional experience. Most sources don't agree about what to do with italics. Some sources say that italics are completely fine, and other sources say that some ATS systems can't read them. If I were you, I wouldn't want to risk it, so I'm going to recommend that you don't use italics on your resume. But again, if you want to make something stand out, you could make it bold or you could write it in all caps. Now let's look at the bulleted list under that professional experience. First of all, this text is very, very small. Make sure that you are using a readable text size. Most of your text should be 11 to 12 point size, but if you want to make your headings and your name a little bit bigger, you could do 13 to 14. Again, here we have custom bullet points, so make sure that you are using either the standard bullet points or anything that can be typed on a computer. So in addition to these being custom bullet points, they're also not the same bullet points that I used in a previous section. So make sure you're using the same bullets or symbols that can be typed on your keyboard for every single list on your resume. And make sure the bullets line up with each other. So the ones under professional experience are indented in a little bit further than the ones under summary of qualifications. Make sure all of them are lined up. So let's take a look at what this same resume would look like with all of those things fixed. It's a much cleaner, more streamlined look. Now you might be thinking there's an awful lot of white space over on the right side. Well, keep in mind that this isn't a full page that we're looking at. This is just a very small sliver at the top of a page of a resume. So it's really not that much white space. But if you really don't like having all of that white space, you can use the Tab key on your keyboard to create multiple columns. Make sure the only way that you're creating multiple columns is by using the Tab key on your keyboard. Here are some more formatting tips. Use 1-inch margins. 1-inch margins are usually the default in most document programs these days. But don't try to make those margins smaller to fit more content onto one page. And don't make them bigger to try and make it seem like there is more content on the page than there actually is. If at all possible, try to keep them at 1 inch. Be consistent with formatting and layout choices. Have clean page breaks. So don't have half of one job on page 1 and half of that job on page 2. Either delete some content from page 1 so that the whole thing can be moved up onto page 1, or if it's mostly on page 2, just move that entire job down to page 2. You don't want it to be split between the two pages. When you print your resume, print only on one side of the page and do not staple the pages together. If you print double-sided, most people won't realize that there's a second page. And if you staple them together, usually the first thing somebody's going to do is rip them apart so that they can look at the two pages side by side. So instead of stapling them, use a paper clip or some other type of removable fastener. Your resume should look like everyone else's. What this means is if I was looking at your resume, not reading it, but looking at it, it should look very similar to every other resume in the pile. You want to make sure that the content of your resume is what stands out. In the next video, we will talk about saving your resume in different formats and uploading it to a job application. Thank you for watching. There is a link to the full Resume Rescue playlist in the description, as well as a link to upcoming technology programs at the St. Louis County Library. Thank you for supporting the library. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel.